all the wires messed up down below here. I trust you had a fruitful day. I do not say happy, though I hope it has been happy. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to the Buddha, the blessed, noble, and fully self-awakened one. So we are making our way through the through the discourse on how to establish right awareness, and we did the body, and then we did feelings, and then we did mental states. So the last section is called the contemplation of mind objects. And in the old translation, sometimes they used to talk about thoughts and things like that. But actually, when you read the discourse, it's quite obvious that the mind objects are specific teachings from the Buddha. So they're the 5 hindrances, the 5 aggregates, the 6 sense bases, the 7 facts of enlightenment, and the 4 noble truths. So I am going through this at great speed, and the purpose and the reason for that is, of course, there are 2 or 3, 4 good books on this sort of study if you want to take it more deeply. But also, I'm always just slightly, how can we say, fearful. Perhaps that's too strong, but fearful, that the meditation turns into a sort of analysis, which is exactly what you don't want. So if you're in the meditation there and you're speaking to yourself and you're saying, now, is this a worldly, neither pleasant nor unpleasant feeling, or is this a unworldly, neither pleasant nor unpleasant feeling? Then in a sense you've lost the plot. The idea of this, of studying like this, is for it to be in the background, and then when we come to vipassana, we forget all that. We just watch, we just feel, we just observe. After vipassana, then of course you can reflect. That's not the problem. But be quite clear that all thinking processes have to be put aside when we're just watching, just feeling, just experiencing. Okay, so I'll just read it so you get the phraseology of how the Buddha would have talked about it. So how does a bhikkhu, remember this word bhikkhu means anybody who's practicing, okay? Abide contemplating mind objects as mind objects. Here, a bhikkhu abides contemplating mind objects as mind objects in terms of the 5 hindrances. So when something comes into the mind, heart mind really, and it's one of the hindrances, then that is an object to be observed, felt, understood, etc. And how does a bhikkhu abide contemplating mind objects as mind objects in terms of the 5 hindrances? Here, there being sensual desire in him, a bhikkhu understands there is sensual desire in me. Okay, so it's a direct acknowledgement of desire. So this is the benefit of the noting. So it's just desire. And there being no, and then of course when it passes, and there being no sensual desire in him, he understands there's no sensual desire in him. So this is something that we have to really experience for ourselves, that if the mind is full of some sort of desire, or if we go through the other hindrances, all the aversive stuff, all the dullness and lethargy, all the restlessness and the guilts and all that, and finally all these doubts, when these come to mind, to actually recognize what it is, okay? And in recognizing what it is, we're also experiencing how it affects us. The agitation of desire, the burning of anger, and that sort of stuff. And then when it passes, then you experience the mind, the heart mind, without that. See? And knowing that, you want to move always towards the heart mind, which is not disturbed by any of the hindrances. And so it ends by saying how there comes to be the arising of an unarisen sensual desire. In other words, what triggers these sensual desires, and how there comes to be the abandonment of these sensual desire, which is, of course, not getting involved. So that's the indulgence bit, right? So remember, there's always the original desire comes up, and then there's the desire to indulge it. Okay, planning your holiday, for instance, and off you go dreaming about how wonderful it'll going to be. That's when they let us out. Yeah. And how there comes to be a future non-arising of abandoned sensual desire, which means that eventually the whole process of wrong desire, wrong aversion is completely gone, and that's a high state of realization, what we call the non-returner. So that means that somebody has arrived at a place where the sensual world no longer appeals. It's like when we're children, and we grow out of snakes and ladders as a game no longer appeals. So we come to a place in our practice where, fine, the sensual world is fine, but it doesn't draw you into it anymore. And so he goes on with the other 4 hindrances. Okay, remember the aversion, dullness and lethargy, restlessness, and included in there is things like guilt, remorse, shame, things like that, and a skeptical doubt. So remember, skeptical doubt isn't the honest doubt of the philosopher in us, the sense of wonder. None of this is meant to be taken as gospel. Remember, we're supposed to be investigating it so it becomes true for ourselves. So remembering that there's a type of doubt which stops you from doing something, and that's the skeptical doubt. When you say I can't do something, and you convince yourself you can't do it, and that stops you from doing it. So something that perhaps we've all experienced is, on the high diving board, and you might have got up there and you're just too afraid to go. You can't do it, you see, until somebody pushes you, and then of course you can. So skeptical doubt is different from what you might call an honest doubt, which is what we're supposed to have. We're supposed to have an attitude of curiosity, of finding out whether the Buddha's teaching is actually true for us. And that's the process of the enlightenment, you might say, the understanding, the insight. The insight won't come unless we are investigating for ourselves. And of course, he does this, you're aware of it within you, but you can also be aware of these things in others, greed in others, anger in others, and so forth. Yeah. And then, of course, there's always this vanishing factors and arising factors, both the arising factors and vanishing. So always this realization or this constant understanding that things are continuously arising and continuously disappearing. So that's the anicca, that's the impermanence of what it is that we're experiencing. And then finally, when we get to that point of vipassana where we're just watching, just feeling, just experiencing, simply established in him to the extent necessary for, now the word is jnana, and it's translated here as bare knowledge, but jnana is a similar word to panya, which means to realize, to actually see something directly. And so enough of that intuitive intelligence and awareness to arise. And that word mataya, that word just enough, you see, just enough for the insight to arise. So that's the investigation of the 5 hindrances. Then there are the 5 aggregates. So if you forget them, let me remind you. There's the body with all its sensations, etc., and it includes the sense bases. Then there's feeling. So this is now those of you who know dependent origination. That's the process. The process. That's the human being in process of creating the world. mainly the process of how we create suffering. And as we undo that, the process is how we slowly become fully liberated from wrong views and the purification of the heart. So the dependent origination is the description of the process. Now, the five aggregates is more a cross section. If you were to take a human being at any one time and just look at that human being, then you'd come across these five aggregates. So an aggregate is telling us that it's made up of all sorts of little bits and pieces, like the body, billions of cells. Okay, so there's the body, and which from the mind's point of view, from our personal experience point of view, of course, are the senses, and we'll come to that in a minute. And then there's the feeling, and then perception. So this is all the mentation stuff that goes on. The perception, which is like a photograph or a photocopy of something, and how that photocopy is changed as we get to experience similar things over and over again until we reach the higher concepts, things like freedom and happiness, for heaven's sake. So when those two are combined, feeling and perception, with the will to create something, that's when you have a habit. Okay, sometimes you'll see it translated literally as volitional formations. In other words, the act of will has to be there for something to be done. And when you make an action, remember, and you repeat it, then you get the habit. Okay, and as they say, a compendium of habits, a whole collection of habits, is your personality. That's all character and personality is. It's a collection of habits. Once you've got that, your destiny, you see, you've got your destiny. It'll drive you somewhere. So what our practice is doing is making us look at these habits and decide, well, look, this habit's going to take me into the hell realm, and these habits are going to take me into the heavenly realm. So where do you want to be tomorrow, you see? So again, he says, and how does a bhikkhu abide contemplating mind objects as mind objects in terms of the five aggregates? Here, a bhikkhu understand such is material form, such is its origin, right? In other words, aware of the body when it arises like an itch. So you're aware of it, aware of its disappearance and of its arising and passing. And the same with feeling. Such is its origin, such is disappearance. Perception, such its origin, such is disappearance. The habits, such is origin and their disappearance. And finally, consciousness. So I'll put that right at the end. I didn't mention that consciousness. Remember, that's just a screen upon which everything is arising to be known. It's the first act, you might say, of cognition. So in this way, he abides contemplating objects, mind objects internally. You can often see it in other people too, their feelings, their emotional states, their habits. And that's how we contemplate these mind objects as the five aggregates. The next one is the six sense bases, the ayatana. Dimensions, six spheres of experience, because the sense bases they are mono, aren't they? So you can only see through your eyes. You can't see through your ears, even if you try very hard. Through your ears, you can only hear. So they are different ways of experiencing the world, and of course our inner experience too. And so they are to be seen more as dimensions. And this word ayatana is also used to explain nibbana, you see, because he'll talk about nibbana as an ayatana where all this is not included, where all this does not manifest. Okay, it's a very famous verse in the inspiring discourse, inspiring verses, the inspiring verse, the Udana Sutta, which perhaps will come upon another time. So it's the same thing. You're observing the eye. He understands forms, right? The perception in the eye. He understands the fetter that arises with both. So the fetter, of course, is desire or aversion. Just as a side point, you can sometimes just as it were, if you're standing in a park, I think we're allowed now, some parks anyway, or in the garden, and just, you know, if you pan your garden from one side to the other, or you pan what you can see out of your window, and what you're looking at, or what you're being aware of, is how the eye picks things up for you. You don't have to try at all, right? As soon as the eye hits something, then it'll be recognized by the mind. So you can actually step back, as it were, from that process and recognize that it's just happening as a psychological habit, you might say. So that, of course, it gives you the sense of, again, anatta, not me, not mine. So he does that with all the other ones. He understands the ear, he understands sounds, he understands the nose, he understands odors, he understands the tongue, he understands flavors, he understands the body, he understands tangibles, what you can feel. He understands the mind, he understands mind objects, what you think, what you emote, and he understands the fetter that's dependent on them both. And he understands how there comes to be the arising of that fetter. Right, so it's always this desire, this aversion, or not, or a certain deluded understanding about what we're experiencing, and so there becomes also the abandoning of that fetter, and how there comes to be no more fetters arising. Okay, so these fetters, that's a special word. We've actually touched upon it earlier. There are 10 of them, and 2 of them are to do with sensual pleasure and aversion. So they're fetters. They're holding us to this level of existence, or to this level of being that we're in, which is causing us suffering at some level or another. Very good. How are we doing for time? Oh, right. Okay. Well, I've got enough time to do the 7 enlightenment factors. So much the same. So this one is slightly different, because these are beautiful. So again, the bhikkhu abides contemplating mind objects as mind objects in terms of the 7 enlightenment factors. How does he do that? Here, the mindfulness enlightenment factor is in him. So when you become aware of being aware, there is this mindfulness enlightenment factor in me, and there being no mindfulness enlightenment factor in me, and understands that. So when the mind has wandered, you wake up and you think, you see, that's being mindless. Okay. Comes to fulfill now, and then the paragraph is, and he also understands how there comes to be the arising of unarisen mindfulness factor. In other words, what makes mindfulness come, what establishes mindfulness for us, and how arisen mindfulness enlightenment factor comes to fulfillment by development. So in other words, how we can develop this mindfulness to a point where the fulfillment is eventually, not at this point, but eventually is the liberation, the awakening as such. And so he then talks about the investigation states. That's the factor of investigation. Here it's put in a particular form, but the way that I've come to understand it is just by seeing the opposites. So this applies the same to interest, your curiosity, but that has to be balanced with a certain calmness. And then there's concentration, which has to be balanced with effort. If there's not enough effort, you fall asleep. If there's too much effort, you get restless, and so on. And this equanimity coming from a place of a balanced heart mind, where you can do the investigation clearly. And the investigation is this direct understanding of what it is we're experiencing, which is always from the point of view of relationship, desire, wrong desire, aversion, etc., impermanence, and not self. And so it comes, with all of them, you get this last stanza, and it says, he also understands how there comes to be the arising of unarisen, what was not there before, how it comes to be, all these different 7 factors of enlightenment, and how to maintain it and develop it to its fullness, and at which point, hopefully, some liberation arises. So I think we can, yes, we can leave it there, and we'll just finish it off tomorrow evening. So again, apologies for sort of rushing through this, but as I say, there are many texts, and this is a very fulsome discourse on it. There are other scriptures, the main one being the Sarvastivadin. So this was another school which existed at the same time as Theravada, but seems to have died out. But their scriptures are all were kept in Chinese, and they've now virtually been all translated. And so we now have a translation of their Satipatthana discourse, of their discourse on how to establish awareness. And it's not as full as this. So this has been obviously augmented, it's been made, it's grown over time with memory from what the Buddha was teaching, trying to get it all together in one discourse. Okay. So remember, even though we know all this, when we're sitting, we're not trying to be analytic, all right? That's bringing the head in, and you don't want the head. You want just pure awareness, pure intuitive awareness, just watching, just feeling, just experiencing. So I hope my words have been of some assistance. May you, by your devotion to practice, be liberated from all suffering sooner rather than later. So we can begin our practice.